The topic of today's presentation is the effect of enhanced input on learning word associations and collocations. The enhanced input in this study refers to the input outside the classroom, which is the natural exposure to the English input. We intend to see whether the enhanced input would affect the learning of word associations and collocations. The outline of today's presentation starts with the rationale of the study, followed by two of the focuses of the literature review. First is the vocabulary knowledge assessed in our study, word associations and collocations, and then the effect of sequence of treatment due to the design of our experiment. And then we will introduce how we carry out the empirical study, followed by its results, discussion, and conclusion. So, why do we want to carry out this study? Input plays a very important role in second language acquisition. As far as vocabulary learning is concerned, input offers the repetition of the words and the context where learners can sort out the meaning. However, English class in Taiwan does not meet any of the criteria. Here's a short video of what English class is like in Taiwan. Tell me how you think about this class. Alright, how certain do you feel it is an English class? Obviously, English class in Taiwan offers very little English inputs in class. So these students do not receive a lot of English input, not to mention authentic English input. It will result in very few number of repetitions of the words, and it will also reduce the number of the chances that learners can practice sorting out the word meaning in the context. So what can we do to help these students out? According to one study carried out by De Bot et al. In 2004, they carried out a large-scale study with about 1,000 of pupils aged from 13 to 16 on their English proficiency. And they found that input outside the classroom setting, such as listening to pop music or watching movie, is more influential on English proficiency than in-class learning. So we're thinking maybe the input outside classroom, the enhanced input, might be a solution to these students, because it indeed increases the number of the repetitions and increases the practice on sorting out the word meaning from the context. Since we have already determined to see whether the enhanced input would help these students on vocabulary learning, in the next section we will introduce what kind of vocabulary knowledge we are going to assess in our study. There are two types of vocabulary knowledge in our study: associations and collocations, with two vocabulary levels, receptive and productive levels. The receptive vocabulary knowledge refers to the ability to recognize the vocabulary knowledge, while the productive knowledge refers to the ability to productively produce the vocabulary knowledge. Generally speaking, receptive vocabulary knowledge is more advanced than the productive knowledge. So, in our study, we will look at 4 dimensions of vocabulary knowledge: receptive and productive associations, and receptive and productive collocations. Izura and Fitzpatrick characterized 6 types of word associations in 2011. In our study, we will only focus on one type of association, which is the association with equivalent meaning, such as synonyms. So for instance, big and large, small and little. As for collocations, we'll look at 4 types of collocations: the compounds, lexical collocations, grammatical collocations, and phrasal verbs. The major difference between grammatical collocations and phrasal verbs is that grammatical collocations is the combination of a lexical word and a grammatical word, while phrasal verbs are the combination of a verb and an adverb. There are 2 studies which have investigated the acquisition of associations and collocations. Schmidt and Miura observed a group of Japanese learners of English, and they found that these learners had only 50% of the known words productively and correctly associated. So the percentage is really low. And they argued that the reason why there is such low percentage of successfully associating verb associations was because these learners only know the Japanese translation of these English words. So the L1 translation does not help these learners to learn associations. Duro and Schmidt observed a group of English learners in UK, English as a second language, in 3 different kinds of training sessions of collocations, and they found that the repetitions and the various contexts can help learners to learn collocations better than single presentation. So from these 2 studies, we know that L1 translation does not help to learn associations, but repetitions in various contexts would help learners to learn collocations. This is in line with what we would expect to benefit from the input outside the classroom, the enhanced input. There is no study comparing the acquisition of associations and collocations, but there is one relevant study carried out by Izura and Fitzpatrick in 2011. They tested the productive response time of collocations and associations, and they found that the productive response time of collocations is smaller than that of associations. The mean of the response time of collocation is 1.6 seconds, while that of associations is 2.2 seconds. So we could argue that it might be easier to learn collocations than associations. From the previous slides, we already know that we want to see whether enhanced input will be able to help learners to learn associations and collocations. When we want to answer this question, we always have to compare 2 types of groups. One group represents as a control group without any enhanced input, and the other group represents the experimental group with extra enhanced inputs. And most of the study would compare these 2 groups with 2 homogeneous groups. So group A will represent the control group, and group B will represent the experimental group. In our study, we intend to make a direct comparison of the experiments. So we will only use group A act as both the control group and the experimental group. But when we want to do that, when we want to make the direct comparison of control and experimental group, there's another factor that might influence the results. That is the sequence of the experimental treatment. So The control condition might take place before the experimental condition or after the experimental condition. So that's why that makes the sequence of treatment becomes another factor that will influence our results. So based on all the slides, that leads to 4 of the research questions that we wish to answer. First, we want to know whether the enhanced input, the input condition, will affect the learning of collocations and associations. Second, we want to know whether the sequence of input conditions will affect the learning of collocations and associations. Third, we want to know whether receptive vocabulary knowledge is more advanced than the productive knowledge, and whether the collocations is more advanced than the associations. So it's time to introduce our empirical study. There are 2 homogeneous groups involved in our study. Group A and Group B received inverse input conditions over 8 months. Group A received high input in the first 4 months and low input in the last 4 months. During the period of the high input, they received extra 5-hour input. For each group, there are 23 participants, and when these participants were involved in the experiment, they were age 14. Based on the questionnaire conducted before the experiment, they had very little input outside the classroom setting, which was about 1 to 1.5 hours per week. There are 2 types of input resources for these learners in the high input period of time. First is the 20 graded readers, with each about 550 words in length. And this graded reader is used for the EFL learners who have approximately 1,000 words in size. The other input resource is 15 American movies. And one of the movies that they love watching is The Resident Evil. Maybe because it's an action movie and with a lot of violence involved. As for the vocabulary assessment, there are 40 items in each test. Among 40 items, 10 items are for each type of vocabulary knowledge. Among 10 items, 4 items are from frequency band 1 to 1,000, 4 are from 1,001 to 2,000, and 2 are from 2,001 to 3,000. The frequency band is based on the Contemporary Corpus of American English, the COCA, because these learners receive most of their input from American movies. Then the results. This table shows the interaction between time of measurement and the input conditions. Sorry that I forgot to mention one thing. We carried out a MANOVA test. So this table shows the interaction between time of measurement and the input conditions, high and low. The x-axis is the time of measurement. The y-axis is the estimated marginal mean of the words learned. Group A seemed to show an increase in the low input condition from time 1 to time 2, while they seem to show a decrease in the high input condition from time 1 to time 2. This table also shows the interaction between time of measurement and the input condition, but this is for Group B. So Group B does not seem to show any change in the low input condition from time 1 to time 2, while they seem to show an increase in the high input condition from time 1 and time 2. However, the interaction between time of measurement and the input condition was not significant. So the input condition does not influence the learning of collocations and associations. This table shows the interaction between input condition and the sequence of input conditions. because as we said, Group A represents the input condition with high input first and then low input, while Group B represents the group which receives low input first and then high input later. And the x-axis is the input condition, the low input condition, and the high input condition. The y-axis is still the estimated marginal mean of the words learned. And it seems that Group A seems to show a decrease from low input to high input condition, while Group B seems to show an increase from low input to high input condition. So these two groups show opposite development. The interaction between input conditions and the sequence of input conditions was significant. So the sequence of input conditions indeed influences the learning of word collocations and associations. The main effect of the level of vocabulary knowledge, receptive and productive, was significant. The receptive knowledge was more advanced than productive knowledge. The main effect of types of vocabulary knowledge, the collocation and associations, was not significant. So there was no difference between collocations and associations. So now, to summarize what we have found, first, input conditions do not influence the learning of collocations and associations. Second, the sequence of inputs, however, influences the learning of collocations and associations. Third, the receptive vocabulary knowledge is more advanced than the productive knowledge, while the collocations is equal to the association. Then that leads to our discussion. It seems that the sequence of input condition plays an even more important role than the input condition. So if we look at Group B, who showed an increase in high input and no change in low input, and we think that the reason why there is an increase in high input was because some of the testing items were explicitly taught from the textbook in the first 4 months, where they have their low input condition. So these learners know the meaning of the word in the first 4 months, and that will facilitate them to consolidate the knowledge of collocations and associations in the last 4 months, and where they receive extra enhanced input. So we could argue that the timing of providing a certain type of vocabulary knowledge is very important. It's suggested that we had better give learners the meaning of the word explicitly prior to any forms of extra enhanced input, so that these learners will be able to acquire the contextual vocabulary knowledge. The enhanced input does not change the nature of the vocabulary knowledge. The receptive knowledge is still larger than the productive knowledge. We found different results from what we expected from the Missouri and Fitzpatrick study. We think it might be because that we use different measures. They measured the reproductive response time while we measured the words learned. That's why we found we find the collocations and associations are equal. So our conclusion is very simple. Yes, the enhanced input, the natural exposure to English input, helps these learners to learn contextual vocabulary knowledge, the associations and the collocations, but only when the word meaning is provided and consolidated in advance. Of course, there are some other work that we could work on because the increases of the word learning in this study is very small. So we could investigate to see how many hours per week might achieve better results. The second thing is we could keep track of the collocation associations appearing in their own input, and we could assess them intensively. We could do some corpus analysis so that we could know what really happens and when. And the last thing is we only look at 4 types of collocations in our study, and we haven't looked at which type of collocation might be more difficult to learn for these beginner learners, and that's also one of the future work that could be done. Thank you.